The sky over Athens was tinged with red, a cruel reflection of the flames devouring the city. From atop a hill, surrounded by his generals and guards, Xerxes I watched the blazing spectacle, his narrow eyes carrying the satisfaction of a king seeing his will fulfilled. Temples crumbled, sacred sculptures turned to ashes, and the crackling of fire merged with the distant cries of Greek prisoners, now reduced to servitude. The empire was taking its revenge against those who had dared to defy Persia's glory. He should feel pride. But then, for a brief moment, the monarch allowed his gaze to drift toward the sea. The calm blue of the Aegean, where his fleet lay anchored, concealed a dark omen. He had crushed Athens, but he had not yet conquered Greece. What makes a king a god? Is it the absolute power to bend kingdoms to his will, or the strength to punish entire civilizations, leaving behind only a trail of ashes? Since the day he ascended the throne, Xerxes had been called the Great King, the one who ruled over land and sea. But that night, as the smoke of the ruined city rose to the heavens, a doubt slithered into his mind like a silent serpent. Time judges kings not only by their conquests but also by their defeats, and Xerxes' fate was not yet sealed. Long before becoming the master of the greatest army the world had ever seen, Xerxes had been just a prince within the grand Persian court, son of King Darius I. His birth, amidst the towering columns of Persepolis, carried a mark of destiny. He was not the firstborn, but his mother, Atossa, was the daughter of Cyrus the Great. This link to the empire's founder secured his selection as heir over older brothers, sealing his future before he could even fight for it. When Darius died in 486 BC, Xerxes ascended a throne that demanded more than mere succession. The empire was restless. Egypt was in revolt. Babylon defied his authority. Before he could dream of vengeance against the Greeks, the same ones who had humiliated his father at Marathon, he needed to crush these insurrections. In Egypt, the new king imposed his will with ferocity, replacing the local government with satraps loyal to Persia. In Babylon, he went even further. He ordered the destruction of temples and had the sacred statue of Marduk melted down, a gesture of contempt the Babylonians would never forget. For 4 years, Xerxes consolidated his position, keeping the empire under control. But Persian blood called for more. Darius' name still echoed through the palace halls, his defeat to the Greeks a thorn in the empire's flesh. Xerxes himself knew he could not be remembered merely as an administrative king. To immortalize his name, he needed an epic conquest. He would raise Persia upon the ruins of Greece. The war against Greece would not be just a military campaign. It would be the ultimate assertion of Persian supremacy over the known world. Xerxes knew he could not repeat his father's mistakes. To crush the Hellenes, he needed a force that even fate would not dare to defy. For 4 years, he assembled what would become the greatest army of antiquity. Warriors came from every corner of the empire. Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Scythians, Lydians, and Persians marched under a single banner. Each unit brought its own weapons, tactics, and languages, but all answered to one will, that of the great king. Among them, the immortals stood out, Persia's elite troops, whose numbers never seemed to dwindle. For every fallen soldier, another immediately took his place. But conquering Greece required more than just soldiers. The same sea Darius had failed to master, would have to bow to Xerxes. To achieve this, Persian engineers built colossal bridges of boats over the Hellespont, linking Asia to Europe. When a storm destroyed the first construction, the king ordered the waters to be punished, whipped, and pierced with chains, as if the sea could be taught to obey. The second bridge, larger and stronger, was raised under Xerxes' watchful eye. The signs from the gods were mixed. There were prophecies of glory and warnings of ruin. But for Xerxes, the only voice that mattered was his own. Under the roar of thousands of drums and the glint of countless spears reflecting the sun, the Persian army began its march toward Greece. The Greek world felt the earth tremble. The shadow of the Persian army stretched over the divided city-states, some choosing to fight, others submitting without resistance. But there was one place where Xerxes' advance would be tested. A narrow pass between mountains and the sea, called Thermopylae. There, a Spartan king awaited. Leonidas, with only 300 elite warriors, blocked the passage. Alongside them, other Greeks joined the resistance, forming a small contingent against the army that seemed infinite. Xerxes, seeing the insignificant number of his opponents, offered them a chance to surrender. When he demanded they lay down their weapons, Leonidas replied with a challenge that would echo through the centuries. "Come and take them." On the first day of battle, the Persians advanced with confidence and were massacred. The Spartans, aligned in a phalanx, turned the narrow pass into a graveyard for Xerxes' soldiers. The second day brought the same carnage. Not even the immortals, Persia's elite guard, could break through the wall of shields and spears. Then betrayal sealed the fate of the resistance. Ephialtes, a Greek seduced by promises of gold, revealed a secret mountain path to Xerxes. The Persian king, unhurried, ordered his troops to flank the Greeks. When the encirclement was complete, Leonidas and his men knew there was no escape. But none fled. They hurled themselves at the Persians, killing until the last moment. Leonidas himself fell, and the few remaining Greeks were slaughtered. Xerxes had won. Thermopylae was his. But that day also carved the legend of the 300 Spartans, a tale that would galvanize Greek resistance and show the world that not even a god-king was invincible. With Thermopylae conquered and the path to the heart of Greece laid bare, the Persian march advanced unopposed. City after city, the Greek polis that had not submitted before the invasion now fell at the feet of the great king. But the true prize still awaited, Athens. When the Persian armies reached the city's gates, they found an empty place. The Athenian citizens, foreseeing the imminent destruction, had fled to the island of Salamis, leaving behind only a few soldiers and priests. It did not matter. To Xerxes, it was not enough to take Athens. He wanted to crush it, erase it from history as an eternal punishment for Darius I's humiliation at Marathon. He ordered his soldiers to set the city ablaze. Flames consumed temples, houses, and markets. The wind carried dark smoke into the sky, and the statues of Greek gods crumbled under the merciless heat. The Parthenon, a symbol of Athenian greatness, was looted and burned. From the ruins, Xerxes beheld his victory. The greatest Greek obstacle seemed reduced to ashes. The Persian king celebrated. Greece was on the brink of collapse. His empire now stretched from Egypt to the Macedonian mountains. His vengeance was complete, but fate, silent and patient, was preparing its response. For the Greeks had not yet been defeated, and soon they would show Xerxes that the war was far from over. If Athens had been left to burn, its true strength lay in the sea. The city's survivors had taken refuge on the island of Salamis, where the Greek fleet, under the command of Themistocles, prepared for one final battle. Xerxes, certain of his superiority, moved his navy to crush them once and for all. But Themistocles was as cunning as he was bold. Knowing he could not face the Persians in open waters, he sent a messenger to the Persian king with a false offer of betrayal. The spy claimed that the Greeks were divided and about to flee. All Xerxes had to do was attack immediately to prevent their escape. Convinced of an imminent victory, the king ordered his fleet into the Strait of Salamis. But there, where the waters were narrow and treacherous, the sheer size of the Persian navy became its downfall. The smaller, more agile Greek ships ambushed the cumbersome Persian triremes. The water churned with clashing vessels, shattered oars, and bodies thrown into the sea. From the cliffs, Xerxes watched his fleet's destruction, stunned. His finest captains fell, his ships sank, and the sea, which he had tried to subjugate, now laughed at his arrogance. The battle became a massacre. Facing catastrophe, the king realized that the worst could still happen. If the Greeks destroyed the bridges he had built at the Hellespont, his army would be trapped in Greece, doomed to annihilation. The great king, who once believed himself invincible, now had to make a decision he never imagined: retreat. The smoke from the Persian fleet was still dissipating over the waters of Salamis when Xerxes made his decision. With the destruction of his ships, Persian superiority was compromised. He still had a massive army, but without naval security, the Greek threat grew. If his bridges at the Hellespont were destroyed, he and his soldiers would be trapped in Europe, vulnerable, isolated, and without supplies. Fearing the worst, the great king ordered an immediate retreat. He left Mardonius, one of his most capable generals, in charge of continuing the war in Greece. Xerxes himself, accompanied by his royal guard, began the long journey back to Susa. The campaign, which had begun with promises of glory, was now turning into a nightmare. Mardonius, however, believed he could turn the tide of the war. With a still powerful army, he decided to face the Greeks in one last attempt to subdue their resistance. The decisive battle took place at Plataea in the year 479 BC. This time, the Greeks were ready. Uniting under a single command, their forces faced the Persians in open battle. The clash between the two powers was brutal, but the tactics and discipline of the Greek hoplites prevailed. Mardonius was killed in combat, and the Persian army, leaderless, collapsed. Persia was defeated. That same year, while the Persians were still regrouping, the Greek fleet, under the command of Cimon, pursued the invaders and destroyed the last remnants of the Persian navy at the Battle of the Eurymedon, 466 BC. With this, the threat of Xerxes' empire over Greece was completely eliminated. The journey back to Susa was bitter. Xerxes, who had set out as an unstoppable god-king, returned as a defeated sovereign. The empire was still vast, but its aura of invincibility had been shattered. Deprived of new conquests, he turned his attention to monumental projects. His rule became marked by grand constructions in Persepolis and other Persian cities, as a way to immortalize his glory through architecture. Palaces, temples, and roads emerged, but all of this came at a high cost. To finance these works, taxes on the provinces increased, and with them discontent grew as well. Revolts once again haunted his reign, and the king, once energetic and ruthless, began to isolate himself. The Persian court, once a symbol of power and unity, turned into a nest of intrigue and betrayal. Nobles and officials vied for influence over the king, and paranoia began to consume Xerxes. His trust in generals and advisors waned, and his authority, once seemingly absolute, became fragile. The great king who once dreamed of dominating the world now lived trapped within his own walls, fearing enemies within his own house. The Persian Empire would not fall to a foreign army, nor to a great uprising. Xerxes' downfall began within his own court. Among those who served the king, there was a silent traitor, Artabanus, the commander of his royal guard. With Xerxes' trust shaken and his paranoia growing, Artabanus found the perfect opportunity to act. He devised a cunning plan, spreading rumors, manipulating allies, and convincing the king himself that conspiracies were forming against him. When Xerxes was completely surrounded by distrust, Artabanus struck. In the darkness of the palace of Susa, in 465 BC, Xerxes was assassinated in cold blood. His body, once draped in royal robes and golden crowns, now lay lifeless in the silence of his own halls. The King of Kings, the one who had crossed continents to conquer the world, was brought down by a simple blade. But Artabanus would not reign. Artaxerxes I, the son of Xerxes, avenged his father's death by exterminating the traitor and his followers. Thus, the Persian throne remained in the same dynasty, but the brilliance of Xerxes' glory would never be restored. In the years that followed, his name was remembered in an ambiguous way. To the Greeks, he was the arrogant despot who tried to subjugate the world and failed. To the Persians, a grand king whose excessive ambition led to his downfall. The war against Greece was Xerxes' greatest mistake. And, ironically, more than a century later, it would seal the fate of the Persian Empire itself. In 330 BC, Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian king who saw Persia as his greatest enemy, invaded Persian territory with unstoppable fury. Advancing over the lands Xerxes had once ruled, Alexander reached Persepolis, and, as revenge for the destruction of Athens, reduced the city to ashes. The cycle had come full circle. The empire that Xerxes had ruled with an iron fist and boundless ambition finally fell before the descendants of those he had tried to subjugate. But history has a peculiar way of preserving great names. Even in defeat, Xerxes was never forgotten. His colossal march, his epic battles, and his magnificent empire still echo through the centuries. Because kings may fall, empires may crumble, but the memory of those who dared to challenge the world remains eternal. If you enjoyed this incredible story about Xerxes, the king who tried to bend the world to his will, don't forget to leave a like. It helps us bring even more epic sagas from history to you. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new legends that shaped the destiny of civilizations. Here, great stories never die. They are told. Comment below. Do you think Xerxes was a tyrant or a misunderstood visionary? We want to know your opinion. See you in the next chapter of history.